The roar of the rushing rapids filled Ethan Quinn's ears as he watched in horror from his perch on Ponderosa Ridge. A woman's terrified scream cut through the air as two men forcibly dragged her to the edge of the churning Snake River and heartlessly shoved her into the violent current below. "Son of a bitch," Ethan muttered, not hesitating for a second as he spurred his horse toward the riverbank, abandoning the cattle he'd been trailing for the past 2 days. Wyoming Territory, 1876. The land was as unforgiving as the men who sought to tame it. Ethan had seen his fair share of cruelty since coming west 5 years ago, but nothing quite like this deliberate attempt at murder unfolding before his eyes. His stallion thundered down the rocky slope, kicking up clouds of dust as Ethan calculated his intercept point. The woman was already being swept downstream, her blue dress billowing around her like some macabre water lily. The two men who'd pushed her had already mounted their horses and were riding hard in the opposite direction. "Hold on," Ethan shouted, though he knew she couldn't hear him over the roar of the water. He dismounted at full gallop, hitting the ground running as he shed his gun belt, hat, and boots in rapid succession. The June water was shockingly cold as he plunged in, the current immediately threatening to pull him under. Ethan was a strong swimmer, unusual for a cowboy having grown up near the Mississippi River before heading west. The skill that had once been just a boyhood pastime was now the only thing standing between a stranger and certain death. He spotted her just ahead, struggling to keep her head above water, being tossed like a rag doll between jagged rocks. A particularly vicious current slammed her against a boulder, and her body went momentarily limp before she resumed her desperate fight. Ethan swam with powerful strokes, letting the current assist his speed while fighting to maintain control of his direction. His lungs burned with exertion as he closed the distance, finally reaching her just as she disappeared beneath the surface. He dove down, the murky water stinging his eyes. His hand grasped fabric, then an arm. With a powerful kick, he propelled them both upward, breaking the surface with a desperate gasp for air. "I've got you," he sputtered, holding her limp form close to his chest. Her face was pale, a gash on her forehead streaming blood down her cheek. "Stay with me, miss." The real fight was getting to shore. Each time Ethan managed to make headway toward the bank, another set of rapids would push them further downstream. His muscles screamed in protest, but he refused to let go. Finally, he spotted a calmer eddy near an overhanging tree. With one final surge of strength, he angled them toward it. His feet touched bottom, rocks cutting into his bare soles as he half-dragged, half-carried the unconscious woman onto the muddy bank. Collapsing beside her, he rolled her onto her side, watching anxiously as water drained from her mouth. "Come on, breathe," he urged, turning her onto her back and pressing firmly on her chest as he'd once seen a doctor do to a drowned boy. For several terrifying moments, nothing happened. Then suddenly, she convulsed, coughing violently as water spewed from her lungs. Ethan quickly turned her onto her side again, relief washing over him as she dragged in ragged breaths. Her eyes fluttered open, startling blue against her pale skin and fixed on him with unfocused confusion. "You're safe now," Ethan said, pushing strands of dark hair from her face. "I'm Ethan Quinn. Those men who tried to drown you are gone." She tried to speak but could only manage another fit of coughing. When it subsided, she whispered, Juliana Harrington. "Miss Harrington, we need to get you somewhere warm and dry. My camp's not far. Can you stand?" She nodded weakly, but when Ethan helped her to her feet, her knees buckled immediately. Without hesitation, he swept her into his arms. "My horse should be nearby, assuming he didn't bolt," Ethan said, scanning the riverbank. To his relief, the loyal stallion had followed along the shore and stood grazing on some riverbank grass about 50 yards downstream. Carrying Juliana was no small feat as he navigated the rocky terrain in his stockinged feet, but the alternative was leaving her alone while he retrieved the horse, something he wasn't willing to do. By the time they reached the animal, Juliana was shivering violently in his arms. "We need to get you warmed up fast," Ethan said, concern etching his features as he helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. He wrapped one arm securely around her waist, feeling her body trembling against his chest. Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. "You saved my life." "Let's get you truly saved before you start thanking me," Ethan replied, spurring his horse toward his campsite. "Those men might come back when they realize their job isn't finished." The ride to Ethan's camp took nearly an hour, during which Juliana drifted in and out of consciousness. He kept her talking whenever she was awake, learning that she'd come west from Boston to teach at a newly established school in Jackson, Wyoming Territory. "Those men," she murmured as his campsite came into view, "they were sent by Vernon Sterling. He doesn't want the school to open." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew Sterling by reputation, a wealthy rancher who controlled the town council and wanted to keep the local population uneducated and dependent on his generosity. A schoolteacher would threaten that control. "Sterling will have to come through me to finish what he started," Ethan said, dismounting and carefully lifting Juliana from the saddle. His camp was simple but well-equipped. A small tent, a fire pit with coffee and cooking supplies, and saddlebags containing spare clothes and provisions. He gently set Juliana down on his bedroll inside the tent. "I need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, then quickly added, "I have a spare shirt and trousers that will be too big but better than what you're wearing now. I'll step outside while you change." Juliana nodded gratefully, her eyes reflecting her exhaustion and vulnerability. Ethan busied himself building a fire, putting coffee on to boil, and retrieving his spare clothes from his saddlebag. He handed them into the tent without looking, then waited while stoking the flames higher. "I'm decent," she called weakly after several minutes. When Ethan entered the tent, he found her drowning in his flannel shirt and trousers, the sleeves rolled up several times and the pants cinched with a piece of rope. Despite the dire circumstances, he couldn't help but notice how beautiful she was, even with her dark hair tangled around her shoulders and a bruise forming on her cheekbone. "Let me take a look at that cut on your head," he said, kneeling beside her with a dampened handkerchief. Gently, he cleaned the wound, relieved to find it wasn't as deep as he'd feared. "Are you a doctor as well as a cowboy?" she asked, a faint smile touching her lips. "Just a cowboy who's had his share of injuries," Ethan replied. "This won't need stitching, but we should keep it clean." Once he'd tended to her wounds and she'd had some hot coffee and jerky to restore her strength, Juliana's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion. "Rest," Ethan urged. "We're safe here for tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do about Sterling." "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me." Ethan considered the question, staring into the small fire. "Where I come from, you don't turn your back on someone in need. Simple as that." "There's nothing simple about jumping into rapids to save a stranger," Juliana countered, studying his face with newfound interest. "Get some rest, Miss Harrington. We've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow." As Juliana drifted to sleep, Ethan sat at the entrance of the tent, rifle across his knees, staring out into the darkness. Sterling's men would be looking for them, and he intended to be ready. Dawn broke with the distant call of a whippoorwill. Ethan had dozed only briefly throughout the night, constantly alert for any sign of pursuit. He made coffee and warmed some beans for breakfast, all the while keeping watch on their surroundings. Juliana emerged from the tent looking remarkably recovered, though still wearing his oversized clothes. She'd managed to tame her dark hair into a neat braid, and the color had returned to her cheeks. "You look like you didn't sleep," she observed, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. "Sleep's overrated," Ethan replied with a wry smile. "How are you feeling?" "Alive, thanks to you." She touched the gash on her forehead gingerly. "And determined." "Determined to do what exactly?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. "To open my school." Juliana's blue eyes flashed with resolve. "Sterling thinks he can intimidate me into leaving, but he's underestimated how stubborn Boston women can be." Ethan shook his head, admiring her spirit but concerned about her safety. "Those men weren't trying to intimidate you, Miss Harrington. They were trying to kill you." "Please call me Juliana." She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "And I'm well aware of what they were attempting. It only strengthens my resolve." "Well, Juliana, I admire your courage, but we need a plan. I can't let you walk back into town with Sterling's men looking for you." She straightened her shoulders. "I didn't ask for your protection, Mr. Quinn." "Ethan," he corrected. "And no, you didn't, but you've got it all the same." Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills, neither willing to back down. Finally, Juliana sighed. "What do you suggest then?" "I've got cattle to deliver to a ranch near Jackson. I was planning to be in town tomorrow anyway. We'll ride together, and I'll help you get settled somewhere safe until we can figure out how to deal with Sterling." "I have a small cabin near the schoolhouse," Juliana said. "Or at least I'm supposed to. I've never actually seen it." Ethan nodded. "Then that's where we'll go, but cautiously. Sterling will have men watching." They broke camp efficiently, with Juliana insisting on helping despite Ethan's protests. As they rode double on his horse, Ethan couldn't help but notice how naturally she fit against him, her back pressed to his chest as they traversed the rugged Wyoming landscape. "How did you end up out here anyway?" Juliana asked as they rode. "You don't strike me as a typical cowboy." Ethan chuckled. "Is there such a thing? I came west after the war, too many ghosts back in Missouri." "You fought for the Union." "Yes, madam, joined up in '63 when I was 18, saw things no man should see." Juliana was quiet for a moment. "My brother died at Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," Ethan said softly. "I lost friends there too." "Is that why you live this solitary life? Because of what you saw in the war?" Ethan considered her question, surprised by her perception. "Partly. I also enjoy the freedom. Out here, a man is judged by his actions, not his family name or bank account. Yet you're risking that freedom to help me fight a powerful man like Sterling," Juliana observed. "Some things are worth fighting for," Ethan replied simply. By mid-afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Jackson, a growing settlement nestled in the shadow of the Grand Tetons. Ethan reined in his horse on a ridge overlooking the town. "We'll wait until dusk," he decided. "Less chance of being spotted." Juliana nodded, understanding the precaution. They dismounted and shared a simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits while watching the town below. "Tell me about this school of yours," Ethan said, genuinely curious. Juliana's face lit up. "It's not much, just a single room with benches and a blackboard, but it's a start. There are nearly 30 children in Jackson who have never had formal schooling. Some can't even write their own names. And Sterling objects because an educated populace might question his authority," Juliana explained. "Plus, the school was funded by his rival, James Hollister, who owns the sawmill. Anything Hollister supports, Sterling opposes on principle." Ethan frowned. "So you're caught in the middle of a feud between wealthy men." "Precisely. Though I never imagined Sterling would resort to murder." Juliana shuddered, clearly remembering her near drowning. "Men like Sterling think they're above the law," Ethan said grimly. "And out here, sometimes they are." As dusk settled over the valley, they mounted up and rode toward Jackson, keeping to back trails and shadows. The schoolhouse was on the eastern edge of town, with a small cabin behind it that would serve as the teacher's residence. "There it is," Juliana whispered as the simple log structure came into view. No lights burned in the windows, which Ethan took as a good sign. "Wait here," he instructed, dismounting and drawing his revolver. He crept forward, checking the perimeter of both buildings before returning to Juliana. "Seems clear, but let's be quick." He helped her down from the horse, noting how she winced slightly when her feet hit the ground. The ordeal in the river had taken more of a toll than she was letting on. The cabin was sparsely furnished but clean, with a small stove, a bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a bookshelf already populated with several volumes. Juliana moved through the space, touching everything with reverent fingers. "It's perfect," she breathed, turning to Ethan with shining eyes. "My own school, my own home." Something twisted in Ethan's chest at her words, a longing he'd thought long buried. Home was a concept he'd abandoned years ago. "You should rest," he said, breaking the moment. "I'll stable my horse and bring your things from the general store tomorrow. The owner, Abner Mills, is a good man. He'll have held your trunks for you." "You can't leave," Juliana said suddenly, reaching for his arm. "It's not safe for you either. Sterling's men saw you rescue me." Ethan hesitated, torn between the propriety of leaving a single woman alone in her cabin and the very real danger they both faced. "I'll sleep by the stove," he finally conceded. "Just for tonight." That night, as Juliana slept in her new bed and Ethan kept watch from his makeshift bedroll on the floor, he found himself reflecting on the strange turn his life had taken. 2 days ago, he'd been a solitary cowboy driving cattle to market. Now he was the protector of a beautiful, headstrong schoolteacher with a powerful enemy. He smiled in the darkness. Life certainly had a way of surprising a man. Morning brought a knock at the door that had Ethan on his feet with gun drawn before he was fully awake. Juliana emerged from behind the curtain that separated her sleeping area, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Who is it?" Ethan called, motioning for Juliana to stay back. "Abner Mills with Miss Harrington's trunks," came the reply. "And if that's you in there, Ethan Quinn, you'd best have a good explanation for being in a lady's cabin at this hour." Ethan relaxed slightly, recognizing the shopkeeper's voice. He opened the door to find the portly man standing beside a wagon loaded with Juliana's belongings, his expression a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. "It's not what it looks like, Abner," Ethan began. "It rarely is," the older man replied dryly. But words already spreading that Sterling's men tried to drown the new schoolteacher, and a cowboy fished her out of the Snake River. Juliana stepped forward. "Mr. Mills, I presume? I'm Juliana Harrington. Mr. Quinn saved my life and was kind enough to ensure I reached my cabin safely." Abner's expression softened. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Harrington, despite the circumstances. Let's get your things inside, then we can discuss what to do about Sterling." With Abner's help, they quickly unloaded Juliana's trunks. The shopkeeper proved to be a wealth of information about the town's politics and Sterling's operations. "Sterling's got the sheriff in his pocket," Abner explained as they sat around Juliana's small table. "But Hollister's got friends too. This town's been divided ever since the railroad survey came through last year." "What about the law?" Juliana asked. "Surely attempted murder, you'd need witnesses," Abner interrupted gently. "And even then, Sterling's men would claim it was an accident or that you fell in." "I'm a witness," Ethan said firmly. "I saw them push her." Abner shook his head. "A drifting cowboy's word against Sterling's foreman and ranch hands. It wouldn't stick." "So Sterling gets away with trying to kill me?" Juliana's voice rose in indignation. "Not necessarily," Abner replied thoughtfully. "There are other kinds of justice. Sterling cares about 2 things, his money and his reputation. Hit him where it hurts. The school," Ethan realized, "if it succeeds despite his opposition." "Exactly," Abner nodded. "Open that school, teach those children, and show this town that Vernon Sterling doesn't control everything." Juliana's eyes lit with determination. "The school is scheduled to open next Monday, just 5 days from now. Sterling will try to stop you again," Ethan warned. "Then we'll need to be ready," Juliana replied, her gaze meeting his with unwavering resolve. "Will you help me, Ethan?" The question hung in the air between them. Ethan had responsibilities, cattle to deliver, a job waiting for him at her ranch near Cheyenne. Staying meant risking everything for a woman he'd just met and a cause that wasn't his. Yet something in those blue eyes made the decision remarkably simple. "I'll help you," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. The next 5 days passed in a flurry of activity. Ethan completed his cattle delivery, then took a room at the boarding house in town, close enough to keep an eye on Juliana but far enough to preserve her reputation. Together with Abner and a few other townspeople sympathetic to the school, they prepared for opening day. Juliana threw herself into organizing the schoolhouse, arranging benches, preparing lessons, and meeting prospective students and their parents. Word of her near drowning had spread through town, earning her sympathy from many quarters, even some families who had previously been aligned with Sterling. Ethan found himself increasingly drawn to her passion and determination. He'd known many brave men in his life, but few with the quiet courage Juliana displayed, venturing alone each day to the schoolhouse despite the threat hanging over her. On the Sunday evening before the school was to open, Ethan walked Juliana back to her cabin after dinner at the boarding house. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dirt street as they strolled, discussing final preparations for the following day. 22 students confirmed, Juliana said, her voice buoyant with excitement. That's more than I dared hope for. People recognize a good thing when they see it, Ethan replied, watching how the golden light caught in her dark hair. You've won them over, she smiled up at him. We've won them over. I couldn't have done this without you, Ethan. They reached her cabin door and an awkward silence fell between them. Over the past days, something had shifted in their relationship, a deepening connection neither had acknowledged aloud. Juliana, Ethan began, then hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud to stand with you. She looked up at him, her blue eyes searching his face. Is that all you wanted to say? Ethan swallowed hard. No, but the rest might be improper, considering we've known each other less than a week. A smile played at the corners of her mouth. I nearly died in that river, Ethan. It tends to clarify what matters and what doesn't. Propriety seems less important now. Before he could respond, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Good night, Ethan Quinn. I'll see you in the morning. He stood there, speechless, as she slipped inside her cabin. His hand rose to touch the spot where her lips had been, a slow smile spreading across his face. The morning of the school's opening dawned clear and bright. Ethan positioned himself on the schoolhouse porch early, wanting to be visible to any of Sterling's men who might be watching. He'd cleaned and oiled his revolver the night before, hoping its presence wouldn't be necessary, but unwilling to take chances with Juliana's safety. Parents began arriving with their children shortly after 8 o'clock, many eyeing Ethan curiously, but seeming reassured by his presence. By 9, the schoolroom was filled with students ranging from 6 to 16 years old, all seated on rough wooden benches facing the blackboard where Juliana stood. Ethan remained outside, alert for trouble, but he couldn't resist occasionally glancing through the window to watch Juliana teach. She was transformed radiant with purpose as she guided her new students through their first lessons. The children, initially shy and uncertain, quickly warmed to her gentle but firm instruction. It was nearly noon when 3 riders approached, led by a tall man with silver-streaked hair and expensive clothes. Vernon Sterling himself, flanked by the same 2 men Ethan had seen push Juliana into the river. Ethan straightened, hand resting casually near his holster as the men reined in before the schoolhouse. You must be the Cowboy, Sterling said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of wealth and power. I understand you've taken quite an interest in our new schoolteacher. Mr. Sterling, Ethan acknowledged with a nod, deliberately not rising to the bait. What brings you to the school? Considering an education for yourself, Sterling's jaw tightened at the subtle insult, but he maintained his composure. I've come to speak with Miss Harrington about a matter of property rights. This land belongs to me. That's interesting, Ethan replied mildly. The deed in the county office says it belongs to the town of Jackson. Paperwork can be. Mistaken, Sterling said, dismounting with fluid grace despite his age. His men remained on horseback, their hands hovering near their weapons. I simply want to discuss the situation civilly. Like you did at the river, Ethan asked, his voice hardening. That didn't seem very civil to me. Sterling's expression betrayed nothing, but his eyes flickered briefly to his men. I have no idea what you're referring to. Perhaps the lady had an unfortunate accident. An accident where two men your men dragged her to the water and threw her in. Ethan stepped forward, blocking Sterling's path to the schoolhouse door. That's attempted murder where I come from. Behind Sterling, the schoolhouse door opened, and Juliana emerged, her posture straight and dignified despite the fear Ethan could see in her eyes. "Mr. Sterling," she said coolly. "You're interrupting our lessons." Sterling turned, a practiced smile replacing his scowl. "Miss Harrington, I'm pleased to see you recovered from your mishap. I've come to discuss the future of this establishment." "The future is happening right now," Juliana replied, gesturing to the curious faces of children peering through the windows. 22 students who deserve an education. Education is valuable, certainly, Sterling conceded, but perhaps not in this location. "I'm prepared to offer you a generous sum to relocate your school elsewhere. This land doesn't belong to you," Juliana stated firmly, "and neither does this town." A crowd had begun to gather, parents, shopkeepers, and townspeople drawn by the confrontation. Ethan noticed Abner Mills among them, along with several other business owners who had supported the school. Sterling also noted the growing audience and seemed to recalculate his approach. "I am simply concerned about the well-being of our community." "A school requires proper oversight, which it has," interrupted a new voice. James Hollister, Sterling's rival and the school's benefactor, pushed through the crowd to stand beside Juliana. "The town council approved this school 3 months ago, Vernon. Your objections were noted and overruled." Sterling's face darkened. "This isn't over, Hollister." "Actually, I believe it is," Ethan interjected, stepping closer to Sterling and lowering his voice. "Unless you want me to start telling everyone exactly what I saw your men do to Miss Harrington at the river. I may be just a cowboy, but folks around here might wonder why a respected businessman would need to drown a schoolteacher." For a moment, Ethan thought Sterling might order his men to attack, consequences be damned. But the rancher was too shrewd for such a public misstep. With a cold smile, he stepped back. "You've made a powerful enemy today, Cowboy," he murmured. "And you, Miss Harrington, would be wise to watch your back." "Is that another threat, Sterling?" Hollister asked loudly, "because I think everyone here heard that one clearly." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sterling glanced around, suddenly aware that the tide of public opinion had turned against him. With a curt nod to his men, he remounted his horse. "Enjoy your little victory," he said, then spurred his horse down the street, his men following close behind. A cheer went up from the onlookers as Ethan turned to Juliana, finding her already looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper that made his heart race. "I believe we have lessons to continue," she said to the crowd, her voice steady despite the emotion he could see in her eyes. The parents ushered their children back inside, many stopping to express their support to Juliana as they passed. Hollister shook Ethan's hand firmly before departing, leaving the cowboy alone on the porch as the school day resumed. For the rest of the afternoon, Ethan maintained his vigil, though he doubted Sterling would return so soon. When the last student had gone home, he entered the schoolhouse to find Juliana erasing the day's lessons from the blackboard, a peaceful smile on her face. "You did it," he said simply. She turned, setting down the eraser. "We did it, but Sterling won't give up so easily." "No," Ethan agreed, "but he'll be more careful now. Public opinion has shifted. It won't be as easy for him to act against you openly." Juliana crossed to where he stood, her steps deliberate. "What happens now, Ethan? You delivered your cattle. There's nothing keeping you in Jackson." The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Ethan had been asking himself the same thing all day. "There might be something keeping me here," he said quietly. "Someone, rather." Her eyes searched his face. "We've known each other barely a week." "Sometimes a week is enough to know what matters," Ethan replied, echoing her words from the night before. "I wasn't looking for this, Juliana. I was just passing through doing my job. But then I saw you in that river and everything changed." "Because you had to rescue me?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. "No," Ethan said, taking her hands in his. Because watching you fight for your life, for your school, for those children made me want to fight alongside you. Made me want to build something instead of just drifting. Juliana's fingers tightened around his. Are you saying you want to stay in Jackson? I'm saying I want to stay wherever you are, Ethan admitted, if you'll have me. That sounds dangerously close to a proposal, Mr. Quinn, Juliana said, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Ethan smiled, suddenly certain in a way he'd never been before. Not yet, but maybe someday soon if you're amenable. Instead of answering with words, Juliana rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't express. Ethan's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as something long dormant within him burst into bloom. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I'll take that as a yes to my not-quite proposal, Juliana laughed, the sound filling the schoolhouse with joy. Yes, Ethan Quinn, yes to staying, yes to whatever comes next. And there, in the schoolhouse that had brought them together, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the future stretching bright before them, Ethan knew he'd finally found what he hadn't even known he was seeking. Not just love, but purpose. Not just a woman, but a partner. He jumped into those rapids expecting nothing more than to save a life. Instead, he'd found his own life transformed by the courage of the woman he'd rescued. And as he held Juliana close, Ethan silently thanked whatever fate or providence had placed him on that ridge at exactly the right moment to see her in peril. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important journeys begin with a single, instinctive leap of faith.